Hello everyone and welcome back to another video here. So of course today we are going to be discussing we're going to be showcasing two solar builds. So how this build works is going to be spread a little bit. We're going to be showcasing the new build first and then the old build later. The old style build was a build that I kind of used for Crotozen. It is spiced up a little bit, but this is the main build that I use for sword bosses. This also extends, I have used this build before in Equilibrium as well, but that is more of a boss damaging setup. Now this setup here that I will be showing off for the new build, this is my main thing that I've really liked since Edge of Fate. It does have a little bit of extra oomph to it, but we'll get there here in a bit. Now, first off, in this early section, keep in mind, the reason why I'm doing it like this is because I'm showing y'all an entire strike with this. But just so y'all can peep the fashion, I decided to go with a Kratos style look, but the Kratos from Dominus. The Dominus outfit from, I believe, God of War 2. That was the theming of this outfit and whatnot. So there is that. I tried my best. Now, keep in mind here, this build is mainly for like a little bit more difficult missions, that sort of thing here. I'm going to be doing a strike on expert difficulty, not master. Can you get through a strike with master with this build? Yes. However, the strike that I want to do, I don't have barrier right now at least, but of course you can swap this out for an anti-barrier weapon. I would actually recommend Defiance of Yasmin because it is anti-barrier. It is one of the only anti-barrier snipers. Keep in mind, Succession is unstoppable, and then Supremacy is Overload. So yeah, and the main two pieces of the build are unstoppable and Overload, but we're not going to really get into that necessarily right now. We're going to discuss the abilities and the artifact first. Then we'll get into weapons later. Then we'll get into the armor set bonus and that stuff later. Now, keep in mind, the exotic I'm using is Khepri's Horn. That part is important. I'm using a Hammer of Saul because, again, this is not a boss damaging setup necessarily. We're using Bonk Hammer for some other stuff. Storm Grenade. This is to build up Scorch attacks. It's not going to kill or anything like that. We're actually using Sol Invictus Roaring Flames. Roaring Flames actually does buff Khepri's Horn Barricade. I would recommend using Rally Barricade. Now, you might be asking yourself, why aren't you using Shield Burst? Shield Burst with Khepris is only good if you have a lot of high health targets. That is the only time this thing is really that useful. I'm gonna be perfectly honest here. I haven't really found this thing to be particularly useful, even with the extra fragment slot. Here's what I would say: Solar as a whole kind of don't really need 4 fragments, like 5 fragment slots necessarily. Does it help it? Yes, but Consecration also has 3, right? We're not using Consecration with the setup because of a particular reason. Now, the things we're using, Radiant and Restoration, have applied duration. That's mainly for Radiant specifically, but we're using Ember of Mercy, so that Fire Sprites grants us Restoration. Apply more Scorch attacks to the target, so that Ignitions build up more often. And then defeating a Scorch target grants melee energy and creates a Fire Sprite. So we have a way to generate Fire Sprites. Now, in our artifact here, we have a way to generate, well, not necessarily, but granting allies an elemental buff gives class ability energy. That is mainly granting cure or restoration. Is this particularly useful? No, but out of the rest of things that are in here, I would say for our purposes here, refresh threats is going to be better. Picking an elemental pickup, matching your subclass element, grants energy to your least charged ability. That's going to be way more useful. However, if you want to use something like Phoenix Cradle instead, that's going to be huge. Then we're using rapid precision hits with solar weapons grant radiant. The SMG is going to be basically an energy weapon, essentially. Micro missiles. Micro missiles cause the combatant to generate a kinetic shockwave. We are using Mountaintop as our energy weapon, so that counts as a micro missile frag. That's why that's useful. Setting a champion, again, this is particularly useful. With an elemental weapon, creates an elementally aligned explosion. Applying a matching elemental debuff to them and nearby targets, aka the SMG is going to ignite, same with 1000 voices. And this one, defeating an enemy has a chance to generate the elemental pickup, being Fire Sprites. This one, pick up Fire Sprites, is giving us... Fire Sprites naturally give grenade energy, so it's giving us grenade energy, it's giving us restoration, and it's buffing our weapon damage as well, at least our solar weapon damage. And also regenerating even more for our lowest ability. And then this one, dealing sustained weapon damage while radiant or defeating a scorched combatant with a weapon causes the target to release solar projectiles. Again, this is mainly to buff the SMG. Our SMG is going to become sort of a super weapon, essentially. So, on that note, though, like I said, we're going to kind of jump straight into this. We're going to do a strike. Okay, so we're actually going to be doing Devil's Lair here because it's a floating boss. I'm using a floating boss for a specific example here. Now, in terms of modifiers, because we're in a lower difficulty when I should be at 400. This does have overload barriers. The main thing that this build kind of struggles with is anti-barrier. Keep in mind that Radiant no longer gives your weapons anti-barrier effects. So that is something to keep in mind. I would have to replace my weapon with Defiance of Yasmin. However, that is an easy replacement. So, and of course, y'all yourselves can do that. But we are going to put on promotion because it's fun and counterfeit here. Actually, we are not going to put counterfeit on because there's particular aspects of this build that I would like to showcase. That's all we're going to do. Keep in mind here, class healing is featured quite often, and Caprice Horn does actually benefit from using that because you're spamming your barricade. Now, keep in mind, we are still 15 under. We are still 15 under. Unfortunately, you know, we can't do the shooty thing, but, you know, it's because of the champion type specifically. Barrier is probably one of the most difficult champion types to get consistently down. We have a ton of overload, like Great Overload and Unstoppable types. But however, Overload Unstop is honestly quite a rare combination. Not too many enemies have that. I believe Scorn is the only enemy type to have that. Dread has Barrier. Fallen has Barrier. Vex has Barrier. Hive also have Barrier. Same with Cabal as well. I believe Unstop Overload is the rarest combo in the game, and that only applies to Scorn. So that is something to keep in mind here. So yeah, we're pretty much gonna, after each solid checkpoint, we're going to be showcasing a different part. So of course we've already done the subclass shenanigans. After that, we will be doing the weapons, then the armor. After that, before, you know, we get fully into the boss here. But again, this is going to be a full-blown strike here. Which I know I usually don't do. Usually I just do solo Lost Sectors, that sort of thing. But again, this build is, you're able to survive for an extended period of time a lot easier than you are to do it on, like, Arc, for instance. Arc, for instance, I would not recommend using for here. Unless you have a team that can... Because, yeah, Arc Titan is a little rough to use, generally speaking. But the solar build is quite destructive. Warm Flames times 3. So yeah, it does. Caprice Horn will not auto do Warring Flames, so that's something to keep in mind here. However, if the enemy dies, then, you know... Bonk! Swarm Grenade will attract. I was surprised it didn't... Well, keep in mind, our Swarm Grenade is not there to kill. Okay. We'll use a little bit of 1K arrow. Beautiful. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Missed. Even if you lose your hammer... Ow! That was my bad. Keep in mind, I haven't been playing the game super regularly, so I missed some of my bonks. So here is where I will show here the weapon side of things. So of course we're using Mountaintop with Recombination and Auto-Loading Holster. Keep in mind, the origin trait here doesn't really matter that much, but again, we're building up recombination stacks by using so many of those solar abilities and whatnot, and getting kills. Now, Year-Tide Apex This is the best solar weapon in the entire game. The only other one that is anywhere close to this is Lunasal because it has Heel Clip Incandescent. No, almost no other weapons except for Heliocentric has Heel Clip Incandescent in a outside of like rapid fire weapons like SMGs, auto rifles, that sort of thing. Keep in mind, Zaoli's Bane does not have it, even though it has Heel Clip Incandescent. They're both in the same column here, so you can't get both perks side by side. But your Tide Apex, I use Flared Magwell personally. This is kind of setup I use. Attrition Orbs, Burning Ambition. I believe it is the only weapon in the game that can get this perk combo, but don't quote me on that. It is the easiest weapon to get it. You can get it in the tower with the legend tokens, and you can re-roll that. Keep in mind the tier of the weapon is going to kind of skew to your light level, so just keep that in mind. But again, you can upgrade your tiers, so these don't matter. These don't matter. Of course, I have a Stability Masterwork. I would recommend having a Stability Masterwork and then using range and stability. Stability is quite important on SMGs as a whole, so that is that one. Now, 1K. 1,000 voices. So I have the Catalyst done. So, of course, you know, this weapon's beam superheats its targets upon impact, causing delayed scorching explosions. So it scorches, which is good. And then of course, charging this weapon unleashes a giant continuous beam of death. It can kill you as well, which is why you don't use it at close range. Your SMG is more so for closer encounters, meanwhile 1K you can use for farther away stuff. This weapon has become partially taken. Detonations produce taken energy that aggressively seeks out nearby targets and blights them, which is really good. Keep in mind, this does not work with Malfeasance. Malfeasance does not give this bonus damage, even though Malfeasance is an exotic that deals bonus damage against Taken. It does not work with the 1K blighting. However, Wishender does, which is interesting. So those are the weapons here. So after we do this little encounter, I'll be showcasing the armor after that. So, and do let me know how y'all feel about this style here. I don't know why I just didn't do that. It's spread sunspots all over the place. Perfect. 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 If you love bonking, oh boy, is this kind of the build. We are going to use a little bit of 1K. The way I have this set up, you can use quite a... Obviously, you can see there's quite a bit of heavy ammo, so... But we're going to lock this down here with a Sunspot. Panic Sunspot here. Again, our super's damage is buffed by Warring Flames as well, which is great. Here's what I will say. The point of, like, 1K's biggest thing is more so single target damage than ad clear. Got a barricade back again. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Again, just keep in mind, we're not really hanging around our barricade too often. Our hand cannon exploded. Oh. Or our melee. Bonk. Also, you can't get your barricade back as fast, and it's kind of important with this setup at least to be getting your barricade back. Oh, we're gonna miss that. Oh, that was clean. So I know there's a particular sound y'all are hearing. And I will explain that sound, you know, afterwards. Ooh!
Barrier is down. We can move now.
Okay. After we clear this little area here, then, you know, we'll be explaining a little bit more. And by the way, we're at ×8, so... We don't need Roaring Flames for our next stage, so let's get into the armor here. So the armor here, we're actually using the Deepstone Crypt set. We're using the 2-piece and the 4-piece. The 4-piece is not that important necessarily, so if you want to mix up a couple pieces, that's okay. Like, use a different 2-piece set, like, use two 2-piece sets. But this 2-piece set for Deepstone Crypt set is really good. Powered melees release an additional disorienting pulse when used to defeat a target. Y'all have already seen it a little bit. The reason why this is great for Bonk Hammer is it makes it a lot safer to go pick up the hammer. Because a lot of times it'll be right near the enemy, so it's a little bit easier to just pick it back up, bonk again. Also, we are using sunspots. So when you do that, the enemy is going to kind of stay, especially if you spawn a lot of sunspots, the enemies are more likely to stay in at least relatively close to that sunspot. Or as I'll saw in a little bit, I bonked. It disoriented a lot of the enemies. They stayed there, and then I barricaded to do that Khepri's Horn burst. Now, when your shields are broken, that seems to, of course, if y'all watch my ARC video, that doesn't have that much of internal cooldown. Releasing a storm of micro missiles while you're casting your super, it is still pretty decent. It's more so just like a cherry on top, but this 2-piece set is extremely good. If you wanted to use a different armor set, though, Lustrous is a good alternative. Receiving healing temporary grants your solar weapons increase flinch resistant handling and reload speed, and rapid solar final blows heal you. This is good. I would say use this if you don't necessarily want to build up in those fire sprites. However, as y'all can kind of see, we heal quite a bit, and you know we survive quite a bit. So I didn't need that armor set to be that necessary, but Khepri's Horn, of course, is the armor set that we are using. Now, here you can kind of see the set we're using. Here we're using Heavy Ammo Finder. Again, we never want to run out of 1K ammo. Harmonic Siphon, of course. Hands-on is important. Again, we are bonking, so that bonk is going to refund our throwing hammers a lot more. And, of course, Power Melee reduces our cooldown, grenade cooldown. Harmonic Loader, you do need one for 1K, specifically. You need one for 1K, and, of course, with the SMG, it's quite helpful as well. I use a heavy-handed as well, generating an extra orb. Charged up is pretty important here. We are using Solar Weapon Surge. We're using Solar Weapon Surge here. Of course, we're using Sniper Damage Resist, Harmonic Loader, the usuals here. We're using Scavenger here. Again, we never want to be empty on 1K ammo. Also, when you're in a boss encounter, it makes it a little bit easier to refill your 1000 Voices ammo. Now, why are we using Solar Weapon Surge instead of Weapon Spawn? It's because of our stats here. Your class should only be at around 70. It does not need to be more than that. Honestly, you can't afford for it to be 60. It should not be any higher than, it shouldn't be no higher than 80, point blank period. So health also doesn't really need to be high either. Your melee should be at around 100. You don't need to increase its damage past 100. However, if your melee is, if you're not using Roaring Flames, you might want to increase this further past 100. But we're using Roaring Flames, so it's buffing it further. Grenade, you're using your grenade cooldown. I do recommend it being at around the 80s mark. You're not using your grenade for damage. Your grenade's not your damage. Weapon is your main stat dump. Weapons is your main stat dump. Because, again, extra special ammo, primary ammo weapon damage, extra heavy ammo damage, but that large ammo brick chance at 45%, that is quite good. Especially if you don't want to use a heavy ammo finder and you want to use, say, for example, Super Font instead to give your super bonus a little bit of a stat bump, you can do that instead. I do recommend having it. You should have it at least where the large ammo brick chance is 30%. But the higher, the better. Of course, it depends on how much you like using 1K. We're going to be coming up upon a section here where we are going to be using 1K quite a bit. So there is the armor explained for y'all. Now, of course, we're going to go ahead and absolutely demolish these little... This is more so like a mini-boss section, but we do have our recombination times 8, so...
The lair is up ahead, under that colony ship. Just on the other side of all those depths.
Look, disorient, they stay in place. They don't move as much. We're actually going to use our hammers here. For this brick specifically. Watch out for that. Woo! Okay, we got... What the fuck? He sniped from across the map! Holy! But I have a solution for him. Like, I will say, this thing eats through ammo. So I wasn't kidding about this thing kind of... Do keep in mind, we are nuking this thing here. I will say we probably won't be going through the entire strike here. But there we are. Now, here we are in the testing facility. So, before I properly showcase the damage setup build, what I didn't get to showcase was actually how much damage this thing can output. Because 1K can output quite a bit here, so just to put things into a little bit of a perspective here. So I am going to Scorch here. I am going to give myself Radiant here, and then I'll dump with 1K. So we're just going to do this. Give ourselves Radiant. You just want to go center of the body. You're not necessarily going to be able to crit with this, necessarily. They're just going to do a 2 mag dumps. $23k damage. Well, 24k damage. Like, pretty respectable. 23k damage is quite respectable. To be perfectly honest here, of course, and if you really wanted to, you could do the recombination, you know, whole 9 yards thing. We're not doing that quite here, so that's something to consider here. But now we are going to move on to the actual damage build here, which, of course, I'm sorry. Here is our lovely Pyrogale setup. Now, keep in mind, this is the old build. This is the old-fashioned I did used to rock. The only difference here is the helmet I'm using. Solar Storm helmet. Back in the day, if you want to know what helmet I would use, I did used to use Solstice Helm. This was the official old look. Y'all can go back. I use this look quite a lot with Pyrogale Gauntlets specifically. But for this one, and by the way, before I'll ask about why don't I use particle deconstruction, or why don't use particle reconstruction? The problem with particle reconstruction here is nothing else here synergizes with solar at all. This one, so when this says casting a super while you are critically wounded, have an elemental buff. That's not as easy as you think to do with solar because the buffs run out pretty quickly. Meanwhile, Amplified lasts for quite a bit of time, and there's quite a whole lot of ways to do that. But the biggest problem here is extreme lack of synergy with solar as a whole. So I'd have to nerf the overall solar synergy if I were to buff 1K. And yes, it has particle reconstruction. However, hold on a minute. If I'm looking at this specifically, dealing sustained weapon damage while Radiant, remember, I proc Radiant. Launches solar projectiles. Picking up of course, the Fire Sprite would grant me increased weapon damage here, right? Um, so, there's some other stuff in there. Of course, I would have Warring Flames as well. So, those are some things of note here. Now, here, let's look at that subclass first, because we're using Burning Maul. We're using Hammer Strike. I actually do prefer using Hammer Strike for Power Gale specifically, because being real here, Hammer Strike your girls is sort of more so used as a movement tool than any actual melee thing. Of course, you're using Storm Grenade, Reason being, to build those score stacks. And then we're using Roaring Flames and Consecration here. We are not using Sol Invictus here. The reason why we are not using Sol Invictus here is because we do actually get a Sunspot upon consecration use. By the way, do not worry, I will be trying to proc Roaring Flames just to give it a proper test. Well, I'll do one without Roaring Flames and one will. However, if you do prefer, more of a Sunspot usage, you can take out Roaring Flames and put it in Sol Invictus instead. I will be showing you all the difference here. Of course, we want Radiant Restoration. I've implied, increased duration. These two are the exact same as the previous build. Same with that one. Then, of course, your Solar Ignitions have an increased AoE. Perfectly fine. In our artifact here, we have, of course, Rapid Final Blows, generate an elemental pickup, a small amount of resistance to various combatants, which is great. While you have a Solar or Prismatic subclass equipped, picking up an Orb of Power grants you Radiant. That is extremely important. It kind of helps you give Perpetual Radiant here. Then, of course, defeating combatants with swords refund ammo. That is more so important with Wolfsbane specifically, as we'll get into later. Then, of course, your ignitions do increase damage in an increased radius. Because, again, consecration. And, of course, there's transfer. That is useful because if you're running multiple Titans, you should not, more than one Titan should not be running Pyro Gales. Only one Titan should be running Pyro Gales. Ignitions do not stack. So that's something to keep in mind. And then we're rocking Shield Crest here because we will have we'll have Radiant, so our grenade will recharge a little bit faster. Now, in terms of weapons, we're using Heritage. Because I love Heritage. Reconstruction, Focus Fury, and we do have all champions in this build. Of course, Year-Tide Apex, y'all know why. And then we're using Wolfsbane. Now, if you do not have Wolfsbane, I would actually recommend running Lament with this setup. If you're running Lament, however, I personally would suggest you have the Catalyst done. Lament's Catalyst gives it Burning Ambition. So Sword Strikes are going to build up those Scorch stacks and then release Ignitions. That is not the point of this Wolfsbane here. We have Attrition Orbs on here to help be unkillable in that close range. I will say if you are using Lament instead, I would suggest you do have Sol Invictus instead, because it is going to become a little more difficult to survive. But I will say, Lament fixes that issue because Lament heals you upon hits. So, Lament would be my go-to option. However, I unfortunately do not even have the Catalyst. It says it comes from Raider Dungeon, but some people have been able to get a drop from an exotic order. I haven't gotten it. I'm not going to farm for it. So, but I would say Lament Catalyst, great with this build. Wolfsbane is the secondary option. Of course, I have the ornament, so I might as well use that thing. Now, for the armor set, this is going to be a little bit more important here. The 2-piece set's not really super duper important here, but Godlike Judgment, when your shields are broken by a command upon casting your super, it just gives a little bit of extra damage to that. Just gives a little bit of extra damage to Pyro Gales as a whole. So it doesn't impact it that much, but it is quite useful. Meanwhile, the power melee, of course, is pretty good here. Again, if the enemy isn't nuked, if a beefier enemy is not nuked by the consecration, they're going to stay in that Cyclone of Flame for a little bit longer. So that is something of note. Also, Hammer Strike as well. If it doesn't, nuke everything, it'll at least blind. If that has at least killed one enemy here. Not as particularly useful, but I do enjoy this set. Now, in terms of stats, of course, health's not important. Class can be as low as possible. Weapons is quite important. Again, I do recommend you hover around the 30% large ammo brick chance, because swords do go through a lot of heavy ammo. This is something that I really do suggest if you have heavy weapons that really burn through ammo. Like I said, with a weapon like Anarchy, your weapon stat does not need to be that high, because Anarchy is extraordinarily ammo efficient. My main reason for having weapon stat being a little bit higher, just outside the extra damage, is mainly because of Heritage, I use it quite a bit for my arc setup. Because obviously I will Anarchy and then spam Heritage. So Heritage is more my ammo consumption there. But again, class does not matter. Super does matter. Super needs to be pretty high. Your grenade, honestly, should be at 70. I can't get this lower, so 70 it is. Melee should be above 1. I would recommend having super and melee being your 2 highest stats. In my personal opinion. I will say your weapon set should be at least 120. If you can. Keep that in mind. But just so y'all can see, these are my mods here. Again, we do have hands-on. Again, consecration. We are buffing our super and our melee stats with these mods specifically, which is great. And of course, we're doing damage with a grenade, reduces our melee cooldown. We are using harmonic loader, that is only for the SMG. Charged up, of course. Cyber damage resist, of course. So ammo generation. Again, we're using scavenger again and solar weapon surge. Those main 2 specifically because, you know, we're trying to, this is a damage setup. And again, ammo is an issue. Ammo at least can be an issue. It's not super big. But again, keep in mind, in our helmet, we are not using heavy ammo finder. So again, that scavenger is to really help that out. It's just the big problem with 1K specifically is that it just burns through so much ammo. And of course, the double time dilation is great, so that's so super and melee bumps last quite a bit. Now, keep in mind, 23K for just 1K on its own. 1K on its own. Keep in mind, we do have Roaring Flames here. This is... okay. So what I will do here is I will actually build up Roaring Flames, and then I'll show you it with Roaring Flames, and then I'll show you the damage without... hold on a second. We do have to build this up, but I will show you the first damage test with Roaring Flames active. Again, as y'all can see, the shit spreads through ammo. You do get... so something that's interesting about Wolfsbane specifically is that it actually does gain more Nano Assault on kills. So again, this build does require quite a substantial amount of buildup. That's something that I will say. That's the one part I don't like about Roaring Flames and Paragon specifically, is because it requires so much buildup. So we do have that. So just remember that it was 23. We're just going to reset that here. And we're going to spawn these ads here. Again, our goal here is we're going to be getting... hold on, first, we're going to just chuck a little bit of everything in the back. Here's ×2. And we'll all show a little bit of consecration. A Cyclone of Flame there. ×3. Again, this is not easy to keep up, so just keep that in mind. We only have 2 armor charges, but that's fine. Yeah, we are generating orbs like crazy. As you can see, now we are going to shave off 1,000 from it because, of course, that's what we had. 35. Well, 34. Well, 34 technically. 34 already substantially better than 1K. But again, keep in mind we did not use any super or anything like that. So we are going to sub this out now for Sol Invictus, just so y'all can see the damage difference. We are only going to give ourselves, just keep things even, we are only going to give ourselves, okay, well, first off, we're only going to give ourselves 2 armor charges, just to be fair here. We do have to build up these stacks. Again, the only part that really sucks is Nano Assault here. That's the biggest problem with this build as a whole, is having to build up Nano Assault, but we're going to let these stacks kind of decay. Again, we are going to make sure we have full ammo here. We're going to let another stack decay. Solar weapon boost. There is going to be a bit of a damage difference. There just is, because Roaring Flames is kind of a big buff, but it is going to be important to do it a little bit more up close. We're going to do same one. 1, 2, 3. Now, usually you can just do 1, 2. I do actually recommend doing the 1-2. I actually did mess up a little bit. As you can see, it is a little bit less. It is a little less. We are going to try it again here. Remember, 34 to 28. It's not that much higher than 1K's was. That's the only issue with trying to use Sol Invictus. Sol Invictus will give you a decent amount of healing, but the problem is the damage. Yeah, with Nano Assault, I do recommend you do 1-2 heavy, 1-2 heavy, 1-2 heavy. With Lament, it's a little bit different. Again, we're going to let these stacks decay a little bit. Remember, we are using Sol Invictus instead. Again, no Radiant either, so that'll be something to keep in mind here. Again, I will say you don't have to do the melee thing, but it does help by giving you some... It does get... Well, actually, we don't have it on it this time. But it just puts a little bit extra damage. One, two. Gets off one more. $29. 29, which is, again, is still really, really good. It is still really, really good. What I personally would recommend here, is if you are using Wolfsbane, I would not suggest using Roaring Flames. The reason for this is because you have to build up. So Roaring Flames, with solar abilities or ignitions, Wolfsbane is not a solar ability, and it doesn't build up ignitions. So you have to not only build up Wolfsbane, but you also have to build up your Roaring Flame stacks as well. Now, what I was doing for Crota Zen is I actually was not using a sword originally. I was actually using, because I was Oversoul when I was Pyrogales. So I was actually using Merciless as my damage, and then I was using Riptide as my other thing. When I was doing damage with Pyrogales, again, Pyrogales is very difficult to set up with Roaring Flames. However, if you are using Roaring Flames, you kind of need to be using Lament with the Catalyst. You kind of need to be using it, because you don't have to build a Lament. Lament is just a charge, 1, 2, charge, 1, 2, 3 heavy. I believe it's 3 lights and a heavy still. It might be 2 lights and a heavy. But just in case, 2 lights and a heavy. Generally speaking, 2 lights and a heavy. So yeah, you're going to charge, 2 lights and a heavy, charge, 2 lights and a heavy. However, I would say for now, until somebody else maybe in the comments has confirmed, I personally always do 3 lights and a heavy, just to get a little bit of a damage. Because, keep in mind, I'm only saying this because Bungie reverted a decent amount of the Lament nerfs, so it became a 1-2 heavy instead of like the usual 3 lights and heavy. So I will say you can probably do 3 lights and a heavy now. Especially with that Catalyst done with Burning Ambition, those extra hits are going to build up that ignition for you. So that with ignitions. However, if you're not doing that, then I would personally probably prefer Sol Invictus. But something else to keep in mind, while you're doing hits, you're generating orbs. We collect an orb of power there. Collect another orb of power there. We're getting a little bit more super energy. So when we activate this, look how much super energy we're getting. If you have multiple people using this, if you have multiple people using that, if you even just have 2 people using that, it's going to be quite strong. Here's what I'm going to say, though. For a general suggestion, if you do have 2 people, both of you are using Wolfsbane and you're both Titans, have one run Banner of War. Y'all can go see my Strand setup if you want to see. If you go watch my Strand video, it's not out as I have uploaded this, but it will be out in the coming week. So go look at that Strand build. You will see a sword-based Strand build. It will likely be using this. So just keep that in mind. This build is like you have one Titan using Strand, the other one using Wolfsbane. So just keep that in mind. Now, for final notes here, that is going to be it for the solar builds. Void will be up next. Then after Void, it will be Stasis, then Strand last. That is the order I have decided. That Strand and the Stasis and Strand in order of release. Now for Void, we will likely be doing a Strike because one of the builds will be a bubble build, and those bubble builds, well, we'll likely be doing a team-based activity. Mainly, we'll probably be doing an Onslaught because that's what the build was originally intended for, was Onslaught. So yeah, we'll be seeing probably a shortened experience of Onslaught, or maybe not. Well, we might do a Strike instead or something like that. But it will end in like a boss activity, and y'all will kind of... Bubble is a lot bigger now, so that is something to consider, that I have to personally consider with placement. But we'll be talking about those changes there. The other build will be a Sentinel Shield that is mainly made for solo play for the most part. Not necessarily for, not necessarily outside of that. For that build, though, we will be doing a Lost Sector for that one. So, because one is for team-based, the other one's not. One is old, one is new. Keep in mind, Stasis and Strand are going to be the two that do not have a new versus old. That is partially because they have not been, they're relatively newer than the other subclasses. But in Stasis' case, Stasis Titan has not really had much meta changes or really anything that major to it until more recent time. And then for Strand's case, the two new setups are pretty much post-Renegades. They're the two different Strand setups that I personally love to use. One is more so for general, one I use in Equilibrium quite a lot. The other one is we're going to showcase the lightsaber. We'll be showcasing the lightsaber, of course. Anyways, and even though, Strand, I would be tempted to do a third one. However, the third build for Strand would be suspend-based, and unfortunately, the whole Ambient Leap suspend shenanigans are not as meta as they once were, because Grandmaster Nightfalls aren't necessarily a thing anymore. And so, though, do appreciate y'all for tuning in. Go check out the playlist for the Arc and the rest of the builds. That's where they will be. Go check my playlist tab. Though, thanks for tuning in, and I will catch y'all on the flip side.